gentlemen, good morning. Good morning and welcome to Georgia Southwestern State University. I'd like to welcome all of our special guests here today. Some of you I know flew in actually, so we're glad to see you. I'm Brian Adler. I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs, and it's a great privilege and honor for me to welcome you on behalf of our President, Dr. Kendall Blanchard. It's great to see all of our students here and also our guests from the city and Rolling Thunder. We're glad you're here as well. This week, of course, celebrates the United States Constitution signing on Monday, 225 years old, the most unique document probably on the face of the planet Earth. And it's a great way to honor what this country stands for, to have our esteemed speaker today and our esteemed professor, Dr. Glenn Robbins, as well. So let me turn the program over to Mr. Brad Bennett, who is the superintendent out at Andersonville, for the formal opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, on behalf of the National Park Service, the Friends of Andersonville, and Georgia Southwestern State University, welcome to the 7th annual POW Convocation. My name is Brad Bennett, and I'm the superintendent of Andersonville National Historic Site, the only national park among the nearly 400 across the country to serve as a memorial to all prisoners of war throughout American history. Today's program is being held in advance of this Friday's annual observance of National POW MIA Recognition Day, an annual opportunity to pay tribute to the men and women of the armed forces who have sacrificed so much in service to our country and in defense of our liberties. Before I introduce today's moderator and guest speaker, I do want to acknowledge the organizations that have made today and the next several days possible, starting with members of the National Park Service staff up at Andersonville National Historic Site. If you can stand, Eric, Kim, Bridget, Lamar, others here to be acknowledged. Thank you. As we like to say at Andersonville, every day is National POW MIA Recognition Day. That's our park mission. That's what we do. Also, we couldn't do what we do at Andersonville without the great support financially and through volunteers of the Friends of Andersonville, who are co-sponsoring today's program. I know we have our board chair and vice president and secretary here, so members of the Board of Andersonville Board of Trustees, please stand to be acknowledged. Thank you very much for what you do. As Brian mentioned, we have our leaders and members of Rolling Thunder who are spearheading the next several days of events. So Mo, if you and members of Rolling Thunder can please stand to be acknowledged. And Brian, I know you and your faculty and staff and students in the Free Enterprise program have been working hard to coordinate today's program. So Brian, Cody, other members that have been involved, can you please stand to be acknowledged? And as Brian mentioned, we have some very special guests who flew all the way from Andrews Air Force today. Several members of the Air National Guard. Can you please stand to be acknowledged? And I know I speak on behalf of everyone in this room. Thank you for your service. Today's program moderator, Dr. Glenn Robbins, is entering his 12th year as a professor of history here at GSW. He has long supported the research and education mission of Andersonville as a volunteer, as a subject matter expert, and through his recommendations of student interns, some of whom have gone on to gain temporary and permanent jobs with the National Park Service. Today marks the 4th time Dr. Robbins has moderated the POW Convocation program. With the Vietnam Traveling Memorial Wall returning to campus tomorrow for a second year in conjunction with Rolling Thunder's annual Ride Home POW MIA events, it is fitting that today's featured speaker served in Vietnam during his military career. Mr. Bill Arcuri, a graduate of West Point, served his first 6-month tour in Southeast Asia in 1972. On December 20th of that year, while flying a combat mission at the beginning of his second tour, his aircraft was struck by 3 surface-to-air missiles just north of Hanoi in North Vietnam. Forced to bail out, he was injured and immediately captured by villagers. Bill was held in the Hanoi Hilton prison complex for the next 55 days. As a result of his injuries, he was in the first group of returning POWs as part of Operation Homecoming on February 12, 1973. After serving in the Air Force for 3 more years, Mr. Arcuri resigned his commission and began a civilian career. Now retired, Bill and his wife Andy live in the neighboring state of Florida. I'm also pleased to let you know that Bill has recently joined the Board of Trustees for the Friends of Andersonville. On that note, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Glenn Robbins and Mr. Bill Arcuri.
Bill, you have a very interesting family history, so if we could, let's start with a little bit about the Arcuri family, starting with your grandfather and your father.
Right, my grandparents came over from Italy when they were small children, and my dad, I guess, would be the first generation American, living in Frackville, Pennsylvania, coal mining community. He left that area because he didn't want to work in the coal mines and joined the Army and spent his initial years right here in Tallahassee, Florida, where he met my mom. And I was born in Tallahassee right after the war, but he had an interesting career. He started out as an enlisted man, first sergeant for P-51 squadron that went down to Panama after Pearl Harbor to defend the canal. Then he went to OCS, and he took an all-black battalion from New York City to England, and they ferried the weapons from the ships arriving in the ports to all the B-17 bases around the country. He spent 28 years and retired. I also have a brother who served in the Army in Vietnam, and a sister who served in the Army, a technical surgical rep assistant in Korea, and so we have a lot of, my uncles and during growing up are all served during World War II, so we have a lot of military history in our family.
Okay, so as with your father being a careerist, what was it like growing up in the different military communities during that time?
During the late, early 50s and 60s, we moved quite a bit. There wasn't a lot of mobility in the population back during that time, but we lived in Sumter, South Carolina, and Dad was stationed at the Pentagon in Virginia. Right after Korea, we got his overseas assignment was Alaska, so we went to Alaska back when it was a territory. I remember that vividly as a child. Then we moved to Massachusetts, Hampton Field. I can remember driving across the country in an old 47 Plymouth. My mom and dad and 4 kids in the back seat. It was quite an experience. And then we moved to Patrick Air Force Base in Florida in 58. And that was a unique experience because that was the start of the space program. Living on base, we got to meet all the original astronauts. When I got my Eagle Scout Award, it was given to me by one of the Gemini astronauts, at the time Captain Tom Stafford, who retired as a Lieutenant General in the Air Force. He flew the last Apollo mission to the moon and many Gemini flights. And so with all the neighbors, one of my neighbors, Captain Smith, graduated from Annapolis. I had another neighbor who worked with Scouts, Colonel Lake. He was a West Point graduate. So I knew a lot of pilots, and that's one of the things that influenced me, that I wanted to join the military and fly.
Okay. You wanted to join the military and you wanted to fly, but you wound up at West Point. Explain how that happened.
Well, I applied to Air Force Academy, and I goofed off in school. So I had good math grades and science, but my native language, English, suffered a little. So I didn't make it, but they asked me if I wanted to go to the Air Force prep school there at Colorado. So I said sure. So I enlisted in the Air Force, and as an enlisted man, spent a year at the prep school. That was 65, 66. And it just so happened that 1966 admission to the Air Force Academy was one of the highest admissions. And I don't know if it was because of the war in Vietnam and people just, or whatever it was, but not everyone in the prep school got into the academy. And they said, well, just wait, because we always have people that'll show up on day one and drop out, and then you'll be sure to come in. But I also had a congressional appointment to West Point. And I didn't want to be one of those guys that came in after the fact. I wanted to start with the regular classes. And I knew, because of my experience and my prior service in the Air Force, and my dad's 28 years in the Air Force, that the West Point still allowed transfers. In fact, most of the early Air Force officers were Annapolis graduates and West Point graduates until they had the Air Force Academy built in 1958. So I went to the West Point with the intention of staying in the Army. But then the Air Force and the Army made this agreement that the Air Force fly planes and the Army only flew helicopters. And I really wanted to, to try to fly jets, and so that's why I took the commission in the Air Force.
All right, backing up a little bit, you were at West Point from 1966 to 1970 during some of the heaviest fighting in Vietnam. So what was it like to be in a military academy during the height of the Vietnam War?
Well, it was, in some respects, it was a little depressing because, of course, that was part of our training, was Vietnam-oriented, our field training in the summers. But when we went to dinner at night in the mess hall, Washington Hall, they would get up and they would make announcements, and they would announce all the recent graduates that were coming home and being buried in the West Point Cemetery there. And at first, it wasn't a real connection because, class of 62, 63, 64, but when I was in the class, by 1969, we were having guys graduate in 68, and then the next year, they'd get up there and say, so-and-so class of 68 is being buried, so it got depressing because we knew them, and they were going overseas, and they were coming back and being put in the cemetery, so. It was a hard time.
Now, there was obviously a lot of good that happened there, including meaningful life. So tell us about that.
Well, when I was a sophomore, yearling we called ourselves up there at West Point, one of the seniors, or firsties, was dating my wife's roommate, who they were attending Marymount College in Arlington, Virginia, down in Washington, D.C. area. And they tried for months to get me to go down over spring break to go out, have a blind date basically with my wife. Now, a blind date isn't bad if it's for one night, but I was going to give up my whole spring break. The first time that I could get off the academy as a yearling, and so I was kind of worried that, man, one night might be all right, but geez, this could be disastrous. But in reality, it turned out, and we've been married now for 42 years.
All right, and you guys guys got married right after you graduated from West Point. So take us from getting married and, did you guys get married at the chapel at West Point?
No, no. We got married in her hometown, Woonsocket, Rhode Island, about on the, what was the date, the 26th? The 26th, you know. And so I got commissioned in the Air Force. We got married, and then I got assigned to Moody Air Force Base right over here in Valdosta for flight training. We were an experimental class. Our whole class was Academy graduates, Air Force Academy, and a couple of us West Pointers. And they were trying to see if they could train us to fly quicker, you know. So they needed the pilots, the turnaround for the pilots. And then I graduated. It was an 11-month program. Got assigned to the Strategic Air Command, SAC, flying B-52s. Then I went through some nuclear weapons school. I went to water survival down at Homestead in Miami. I went to regular survival up in Fairchild, then to Castle Air Force Base for B-52 training, and then to my home base in Beale in January 1972. Checked out as a combat crew member on a B-52 crew and started sitting nuclear alert before we got sent overseas.
Okay. Now, just you mentioned this at dinner last night. Tell us real quickly what Andy was doing in Ailey when you guys were down there. And then talk a little bit about, because I'm going to ask you, when you go to Vietnam, the war is winding down, and it's become a very, very unpopular war. Talk a little bit about, because even myself, we've grown up in pretty calm times compared to what was going on in the 50s and the 60s and the early 70s. So give us a sense of what it was like as you're preparing to go to Southeast Asia.
Right. When we were living in Valdosta, my wife was a teacher, so she got a teaching job at Adel, Georgia. First year of integration at the school, making a whopping, I don't know, about $3,000 a year salary. So it's amazing that what we were getting paid back in those days. But growing up and being at the, while I was at flight school there, we had the raid on Sante, and that's where the military did a night raid into the Sante prison camp in an effort to free some American POWs, which was unsuccessful because they weren't there. They had been moved, and they were about 8 clicks down the road at another facility. And so the mood was, for me, we kind of started out favoring the war because South Vietnam was part of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. They were as democratic as we could think they would be for a country like that, and we were supporting them. But I grew up during the war. My whole life during high school, college was the Vietnam War, and I have a lot of friends who were killed in Vietnam. And so I felt that it was time to get out. But as an Air Force officer, and as long as there were American men and women on the ground over there, and as long as there were Americans being held as a POW, I felt obligated to go and serve and fight. And if what I did over there saved the life of one person, then it was worth it for me.
All right, tell us a little bit about SAC and a little bit about the B-52 and what it was capable of doing, and then go ahead and take us through some of those missions on your first tour. Okay.
SAC B-52 was the prototype was built in the late 40s. It's been around for a long time. It's still flying, and they expect it to fly the H model for another 20, 30 years. Most of the pilots that are flying the H model now are the plane is older than the pilots, So, but they keep upgrading it. So. But it's a big plane. It was the big heavy bomber. Has a wingspan of almost 200 feet. And the gross weight at takeoff, fully loaded, we were about 500,000 pounds. And so you figure that, an average car today is, 3,000 to 4,000 pounds. And so it was one of the heavy, really heavy bombers. We talk about the B-52 in terms of what it was like, and we had 8 engines, 2 engine pods, 4 pods on the plane, and each one of those pods was equivalent to the power of a steam locomotive. And there's enough wiring on that plane that you could stretch it end to end across the country. And there's enough metal on that plane to make 10,000 garbage cans. So if they ask us how it flew, and we told them that's exactly how it flew. It flew like 4 locomotives wired together with 10,000 garbage cans. But actually, it was a really forgiving plane to fly. So the D model, the old model, they carried 108 bombs, 84 500-pound bombs internal. And the 500-pound bombs didn't weigh 500 pounds. It was 500 pounds of explosives. And the G model, we carried 27 750-pound bombs. And the reason they didn't modify us to carry more weapons was the Gs, when they brought the Gs over into Southeast Asia, the C-41s carried the nuclear weapons with them. And so that if we needed to go up on nuclear alert because of if the Chinese reacted or the Russians reacted, we had the capability of doing that on Guam. But still, the 750-pound bomb, when we dropped it, would leave an initial impact crater of about 30 feet by 30 feet. So if you're sitting in this audience right here, pretty much, everything would be destroyed. And the 3 cells that we flew with three ships, and we'd fly in such a way that when we dropped our ordnance, we would saturate a square mile. So you think about that. I don't think the campus is even a square mile here. So, and the Vietnamese or the Viet Cong, they hated us because we flew at such a high altitude that when we dropped, they didn't even know the bombs were coming, and it was very devastating. So I flew about 40 missions on my first tour, and the average mission for us was about 15 hours because we were flying from Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. And we'd fly like 7 hours just to get to Vietnam, and then we'd be very intense for about an hour, and then we'd fly another 7 hours back to Guam. The G models mainly flew the missions into the south, and we let the D models, which were flying out of Utapao in Thailand, and they were configured for the threat against the Russian SA-2s. They did most of the bombing in the DMZ and around and in North Vietnam. So.
All right. By this point, you know people who've been shot down, whether they're MIAs or whether they were POWs. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, one of the families that we lived with in Patrick, Colonel Wynn, his son was a graduate of the first class of Air Force Academy, and his first tour he was shot down and was has been missing in action to this. Well, his body was returned finally, and then Colonel Guarino, whose family lives in Satellite Beach. I didn't know him personally at the time, but Maureen Wynn married Colonel Larry's son, Al. So I knew all about the family. And so when I was shot down and in the complex, I was able to send, Larry was shot down in '65. He flew in World War II, flew in Korea, and he got shot down in Vietnam. So he was an old Air Force pilot. I was able to send him information about his wife, his family. He was a grandfather, and it was nice to be able to communicate with some of those guys. Now, while I was at the Air Force Academy Prep School, most of those guys went to the Air Force Academy. I went to West Point, but we all met back in the Air Force. 2 of my classmates there I met when I was in Hanoi Hilton. In fact, the first guy that walked up to my cell and communicated with me was Rich, and we called him Tiny. He was a backseater in an F4. He was a basketball player, so we called him Tiny. He was about 6'4". And he walked up to my cell, and he looked in there, and he says, "Bill," he said, "what are you doing here?" And I said, I came to check on you, Rich, to see if you were all right. So I did know a lot of people that were there, and that was one reason why I went over, because unless we did something, we weren't going to get these guys home.
Okay, so you actually come back for, 28 days, and so your family knows about the dangers that are involved firsthand, and they know about the risks firsthand. But you go back to participate in something called Linebacker 2. Tell us a little bit about what Linebacker 2 was, and then take us through to the mission in which you and your crew were shot down.
Okay, well, when I was home, we were kind of doing what they're doing today in Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of the soldiers are rotating, 6 months. They're just rotating, and they come home, and they're going back and back. So I spent my first 6 months there, and we were home for a 28-day break. And it was Thanksgiving, and during that time, Henry Kissinger, they were in the negotiations in Paris, and they made the famous statement, peace was at hand. And so we were hoping that, we wouldn't have to go back. Or at least if we went back, that, things would be winding down. So we did go back the second week in December and got over there, flew a couple missions, and then we got ordered to stand down. And we had so many B-52s on Guam. We had like 100 G models and about 60 D models, that we were flying missions. Every 40 minutes, there were 3 B-52s taken off from Guam, 24 hours a day. And when we stood down, we thought that was a good sign that, okay, the war is over, we're standing down. But then we saw fighters coming in and C-141s coming in, and we started wondering, well, something's up. But they didn't have enough parking places on Guam for all the B-52s, so they actually had to close down one of the active runways, and they had them parked nose to tail. And had a meeting with the squadron commander. The wing commander brought us in there, and we were hoping he was going to say the war is over, but then he said, well, the North Vietnamese walked away from the peace agreement, for peace tables. President Nixon was very upset, and we are now going to institute a 3-day bombing raid on North Vietnam, unlimited. First time that we could actually go and just hit any military industrial target. And hopefully that would bring them back to the peace agreement, peace table, and they'd sign an agreement. And so when they opened up put the big chart up on the slide thing there, the target was Hanoi. I'm sure it was kind of like World War II. We're going to Berlin. So on the 18th of December, we were picked for the third night. We had so many crews there. So the first day, we watched about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We watched like 100 B-52s taken off from Guam, one right after another. Now we had a Russian trawler that sat right off the coast. So we knew it wasn't going to be a surprise. They're relaying it that we're coming. So we figured the first night was going to be the worst night. And actually it wasn't too bad. We lost 2 planes, we had 3 waves at night of about 120 bombers each. When you think about the amount of ordnance that we dropped with those 3. And we hit Hanoi. We hit the chemical factories, we hit the electrical plants, we hit the bridges, we hit everything. And the second night, they did the same thing, and there was no casualties. We didn't lose any planes. We had a couple hit. So the third night, we were thinking, well, maybe this is maybe it'll be okay. And for the first 2 nights, and even the third night, we were ordered the order of flight was that there would be no evasive actions. You fly straight and level into the target and you drop your bombs. Once you get your bombs on target, you could evade. Our wave commander didn't like that, and we got out on the buses to go to the planes. He basically said, we're trained professionals. We train to do our maneuvers going into the target. We're trained to drop our bombs on the target, and we will evade until we get our bombs on target, and then we'll evade on the way out. And so going in on that first night, we were the first wave in. Now the G model was unmodified. We had no support to counteract the SAM threat. We were still modified for nuclear, China sorties. We were still modified for flying at 500 feet or below. So at altitude, our ECM was pretty much worthless. But they did have F-4s and B-66s supporting us. And so we figured, everything would be all right. Well, after flying six missions, the previous 2 nights, flying the same routes, the same altitude, the same airspeeds, the same time on targets, North Vietnamese figured it out. And they realized they didn't even need to use their radar. They knew where we were going to be, when we were going to be there, and what altitude we were going to be at. So we were the first mission in that night. We were in the lead in the cell. We were number 3 in the cell. The worst position to be in was number 3 because they tracked number 1, they tracked number 2, and then they fired at number 3. And so when we were in target and lead rolled out on the target and dropped his bombs, our EW, electronic warfare officer, called up, we have 1 SAM site, 6 o'clock, and came up, painted lead, and went right back down again. And then 2 rolled out and did the same thing, and that same SAM site came right back up again, painted number 2, and went down. And the EW, Craig, called up, we got SAM site, 6 o'clock. And so I remember looking over to Terry, my pilot, and I was shaking my head and saying, okay, we're going to get it. And sure enough, we rolled wings level, and when the bomb bay doors opened, we had 5 SAM sites come up on us and started firing missiles. And so I can remember Terry, we didn't want to stay there in that level flight as the bombs pickled out one at a time because we were vulnerable. So he reached up and hit the disconnect and just dropped the bombs, and we rolled that B-52 into about 58 degrees, trying to make it small. And the F-4s, all the fighter pilots called us SAM magnets because we attracted SAM, surface-to-air missiles. And within a matter of seconds, we had one go right by us and detonate above us, and then it was like bam, one in the cockpit, bam, one in the bomb bay, and bam, one in the tail. And the one in the cockpit blew open, injured the EW and the gunner, shattered all the windows in front of the plane. We rolled wings level, and within a matter of minutes, the one that hit us in the tail severed our hydraulics, and we had no mechanical hydraulics on the plane, so we were basically in about a 30-degree dive, just heading to the ground. Took the plane, the wheel went like this, and the plane is just, so I made the statement, let's don't wait too long to make a decision, because the ejecting out of a B-52, you never practice for it. It's, you just hope everything works. And we didn't have the rocket seats. We just had to, like we're sitting on a stick of dynamite, it was just going to blow us out. And so Terry turned on the light and we ejected, and I was the last man out. I got out about 500 miles an hour. The safe ejection speed is 250 knots. And the reason it's 250 knots is because the B-52, we go up, and it's physics geometry, is that we got this big tail in the back. And if you go too fast and you eject, your trajectory is this way instead of up and over the tail. So it would really ruin your day if you hit the tail. So. Luckily, everything worked. We had 2 crew members that didn't come back. But I had flailing, what they call flailing, because we're going so fast, you're strapped into your seat. Your legs and your arms are are loose is that the wind is coming, 500 knots. It just takes your arms and just bends them right all the way behind you and your legs, and just until you get out of that seat. Now you think that 1 second is not a long time, but when it is. So I had injured my arms and my legs when I got out, and when my chute and I was just tumbling, and it was night, and I couldn't use my arms or my legs to get into a nice free fall position, and I just tumbling, and here we were up at 30,000 feet, and I said, no, I'm not going to tumble like this for 15,000 feet. So I just said, oh, heck with it, and grabbed my ring and pulled and popped my chute about 26,000. We carry a little oxygen bottle. But you're supposed to free fall down to below 15,000 feet where you don't need oxygen, And I had ripped my chute. I came down pretty fast. There's a beautiful full moon coming down, and looking up, and I got this nice big white and orange parachute. And I came down, and I knew I was going to be in trouble on my landing. And it's night, and I tried to anticipate hitting the ground because my legs were injured. And I hit the top of bamboo. And I felt, okay, going to do a nice PLF, hit, and I start to roll, but nothing happened, And I relaxed for a second and saying, where's the ground? And all of a sudden, slam into the ground, and dislocated my knees, and was entwalled in all that bamboo, and just trying to make myself comfortable. And the villagers got to me pretty quick.
So after you're captured, you're taken to the Hanoi Hilton, where by that time most all the POWs had been moved to that
Right.
one central prison camp. And tell us a little bit about those 40-some days there.
Well, I spent the night in a target area, and later that morning they came in. They had treated my injuries somewhat. When I was on the ground, I made two decisions. First decision was I took my helmet off, trying to get comfortable, and I set it down next to me. Second decision is I made a radio call. I took my .38 revolver out, took the bullets out, and threw them into the bamboo, and I smashed my radio. And about that time, as I was looking up, I see this little old lady come running up at me, and she's carrying a hoe, and she just swinging that hoe and catches me right across the side of the head with that hoe. So I said, well, taking my helmet off was a bad decision, But then the next guy that got to me actually picked up my revolver and pointed it at me and pulled the trigger 6 times, and I just kind of smiled at him, and because I know that they didn't have weapons. Now, within a matter of minutes, they were stripping my clothes off, my boots off, getting all my equipment that I had, and then they were beating me, and then the 4 little Vietnamese militia guys come running up, actually fought the civilians off of me, and I'm lying there in the bamboo, in the dirt, and they motioned for me to get up, and I point to my right knee, and it was like this. It was totally dislocated. And this little guy, he must have been about 5 foot tall, shouldered his AK-47. He reached down, grabbed my ankle, put his foot in my crotch, and he pulled my knee right back into place, which hurt. But getting back home, the doctor says that guy's, that little Vietnamese saved your leg because you got circulation going back to him. So then they dragged me into the village, and that night they dumped me in the back of a Jeep, and I landed on something soft, and it goes, and I go, who's this? And he goes, Roy, it's my gunner. I said, Roy, this is Bill. Have you seen anybody else? And he said, no. So we drove on that Jeep into Hanoi, and I remember crossing the Red River. We got on a little ferry, a boat, and we're going across the Red River, and I can remember thinking as we're going across, because I grew up Florida on the water, and I'm saying, Boy, I wish there was not some fighter pilot up there looking down and saying, oh, a boat. You know, but we made it across, and then I got into the prison, and the first 3 nights there I was interrogated, and then got in with the older prisoners, and there was actually 3 camps that they were in. There was Hanoi, Hilton, and we called it, and then there was the zoo, which is another place in Hanoi, and then there was a camp up on the Chinese border where there was about 250 soldiers.
Now, tell us a little bit about the interrogations and.
Well, of course, they wanted to know what we wanted to know. I mean, we flew a lot of missions, we dropped a lot of bombs over there, but it's one thing being the bomber, and it's another thing being the bombee, you know. And for the last few days that I was the bombee, I was getting bombed by our own services. And they wanted to know what was going on. And all we knew at the time was it was a 3-day operation. So I was flying the 3rd night. As far as I knew, we were going to stand down, but bombers came back the next night, and they kept coming back. And to me, that wasn't a good sign to me, because I said, well, they're still bombing, so no one's agreeing to stop this thing. And they'd come in and ask questions. There were 3 of them that would come in. 2 of them were there dressed in their military garb, and we had one guy come in, and he was like a medic, he had a white coat on, and while they were asking me questions, he was looking at my injuries, and subtly, and when I wouldn't answer a question, he'd make sure that he inflicted some pain, and like a doctor, he said, "Does this hurt?" And I said, "Yeah, it hurt." But I used my injuries to help me, and I didn't know anything. They said, we know you're flying off of Guam. They had all our books, they had our uniforms, they knew who we were. So they had our Geneva Convention card and everything. So they knew who we were, but I didn't know anything I could tell them. And finally, on the 3rd night, I was so frustrated because I hadn't eaten, I really hadn't slept for 3 days, and I just finally yelled at the guy and said, "Look, I'm just a co-pilot. Go ask the pilot, He doesn't let me fly." And the next day, I was moved in with 9 other guys that were shot down during the same time period. We're all injured except for one gunner. And his job was to kind of take care of us while we were there. And they wouldn't let us out of the cell. They brought our food into the cell. We all had a little bucket, that we would use as our toilet, and they wouldn't let us dump it, so we had all that in our cell. So it was like almost 35 days before I was able to get up and walk out of the cell and pour some water over me, trying to get clean. So.
All right, this has been mentioned a couple of times. The Vietnam Traveling Memorial Wall is going to be here at GSW this weekend. 2 of your crew members, I believe,
right.
Names are on there. Talk a little bit about who they were and what the wall means to you.
Well, the 2 crew members that didn't make it back, Major Warren Spencer, the radar navigator, and Captain Craig Paul, the electronic welfare officer. We never knew what happened to them. We thought everyone got out of the plane, although they told us later that they went down with the plane, and their bodies were returned, in 1977. So the wall has a lot of meaning to me. 4 of my classmates at West Point are on the wall. My flight instructor at Moody went over there in T-28s and was killed. So I have a lot of friends on the wall. So it's a very meaningful thing. And with Rolling Thunder, the next few days, we're going to have a lot of people here, MIAs, who still don't know what happened to their loved ones. And so the wall it's a listing of all the American casualties in Vietnam, over almost 59,000. And the way it's shaped is the wall ends where it begins. And my crew member on that last panel of that wall, 1975. We lost 10 B-52s over the north, Of the 60 crew members that went down, 28 survived, 30 were MIA. So it's very meaningful.
And then one final question. You're a member of the 4th Allied POW Wing, commonly called the NAMPOWs, but you're also a member of a lot of different groups. When we were in Mobile last year for the christening of Bill Lawrence's destroyer, you were running around with teddy bears.
Right.
Trying to get people like Bud Day, who's the most decorated living soldier in America today. Your friends down here are here because you're going up to speak to their group in October. Why do you do all of this?
Well, you know, we have to. One of our guys, Les Ellis, who's from Georgia, would basically say, in order to never forget, we must always remember. And so we need to remember these things. And it's service before self, basically. We made these little teddy bears out of the different military colors. And when men and women that we didn't even know were deployed, we would send them a teddy bear. We sent a Navy bear over to Afghanistan. We deployed Air Force bears. And the bear you're talking about at Mobile we had made one in POW garb, and I had all the POWs that were there, and we had a little mini reunion, and we all signed it, and we gave it to the captain of the WP Lawrence, and they have it in their wardroom on their ship. So we all signed it, and it just we want them to know that we appreciate the service. After Vietnam, for many years, the Vietnam veterans never really got the thanks that they deserved for what they did in Vietnam. And it's not so much about the war, it's about the soldier. And we can't let that happen again, and that's why we do it.
We're not going to do a formal question and answer session, but if you would like to come up and shake hands with Bill or tell him a story or ask him a question, he's not very shy, so feel free to do that. He's dressed up now, but he's going to be here all week, and he'll probably have a black vest on after today. So if you see him on campus over, the wall's going to be put up right in front of the administration building. So if you see him on campus tomorrow, Saturday, you would like to ask him a question, feel free to do that. And if you would, please stand with me and thank Bill Arcuri for coming.